Oh,
It's
sorry.
private.
Sorry. It was in the fan. Give me a break. Time is a consideration. The fucking New York Times. How our families will see us. I mean, there's a million things, right? Will see us. Fear. Fear, I don't know enough. Does anyone want to add? Because it's kind of fun to get these out in the open. People will laugh at me is a big one.
I will be isolated from talking in other spaces.
I will be isolated from other spaces. Yes, that's big. That's so big. That's a good way to silence people. Anyone want to add any? I mean, we could go on and on, right? Ridicule. We played ridicule. Suit, lawsuits. Danger.
Or for example,
Corner you in what way?
Yeah,
No,
exile.
no,
Yeah,
no,
exile. That's a big
Slow
one.
then.
Okay, so these are, I'm going to just make sure that these are considerations. Okay, so I want to say like all of these considerations, but they shouldn't be what drives your life. They are considerations that you need to, they may be true, and we can't ignore them, but we don't want them to drive our life. When we act like the cancer scenario yesterday, if you believe you knew the cure for cancer that could save all of our lives, fear of being ridiculed might be real, but don't let that drive you. Let that be a consideration.
and acknowledge that so you don't get like so surprised and fragile.
So let's just say that's a strategy.
Strategy.
Acknowledge. So I think you're saying acknowledge risks. Sometimes openly, even acknowledge risks openly can help. Also, here are some strategies that we learned yesterday. Acknowledge and dismiss. Validate and trump. Which, by the way, this is a really powerful tactic because it's like telling someone, you're right, you're so smart, that's exactly right, but I think there's this other little thing that's more important. You can do it in a way that is very winning. Can you see, Maria? Personal caveat.
Yeah.
There is a piece in your packages by a man who was on death row, a man who was had a lawsuit against him for murder. And he was on death row he was in jail for 18 years. 14, they were going to kill him. And they found out at the very last minute, his lawyers, because he had maintained that he was innocent, they found biological proof, blood. They found blood they had.
Is that the brother and sister?
No, this is, his name is John Thompson, and there's an article by him in the packet. And he sued the United States government. And then he wrote a piece. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was a big court case. And he wrote a piece about it because in the Supreme Court, he sued the government. He was innocent. That's not the case. He sued the government for wrongfully trying to kill him. And that case he lost, but it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So he wrote an article about it, actually with us. This was in one of these programs, and that's the piece in there. And in it he says, because he stood to win $14 million, but because he didn't win the case, he didn't get hardly any money. And he wrote this piece, and at the end he wrote personal caveat. You might think that I'm writing this because I could win a lot of money. But here's what my life is like. Here's what I do. He runs an organization for exonerated criminals. They're not criminals, exonerated prisoners. Here's how I live my life. I don't live my life using money. So if you think that's what I'm about, you're missing the whole point. He issued a personal caveat.
So personal caveat will be
advancing on any weakness that you can have, so you acknowledge, but you on that's not true.
And sometimes you invert. Sometimes you invert. Remember we said?
Yeah.
Make your liability your asset. That's another strategy.
Yes, that's.
I have not forgotten you, Laura. We're going to come to your question too. Into your asset. Empathy and respect, really, these are so, I almost want to write them. These are huge strategies, but not the only ones. I want to say it one more strategy, really important to say. Silence is a strategy.
Yes.
Silence is a strategy, and there are times when you need to be able to use that strategy. For example, if your life were in danger. But if it is your only strategy, then we need to come back to this chart and figure something out, because that means you don't have a voice. And actually, we think of voice as synonymous with mattering. So what do we put up here? I wanted to say two things go up here. The first thing is that we matter, that we actually matter, that we can't leave it up to somebody else to narrate our world, that we ourselves and our ideas matter. And the second thing that goes up here is dependent on each of you, and you have to pick for yourselves. What are the things that matter to you? You have to decide, what do I put up here? Because some people put LGBT rights for above women's health and
Yes.
in some cases. I mean, not that they don't
Or
think both are
culture,
important, but they need to
Local
decide.
culture more than human rights.
Right. So this underlies. You think that we're teaching a program on voice and media, but actually this is really not about media at all. It is about voice, but this is underlying everything we do. So if there's a question that comes up, we try and always answer it with this in mind. Like, what really matters, and everything else is a consideration that you'll have to decide. Might be real, might be true. Sometimes this will happen. Sometimes I will work with a community